Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Freshly Pressed. Today we have with us Frank Martin, all the way from New York. Welcome to the show, Frank.
Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Frank, tell us a bit about yourself and how you got interested in comics and writing. Why did you choose this as your career, if this is your career?
I I've always loved storytelling is what I don't really describe myself too much as a writer. I like to be a storyteller. So I've always crafted stories and loved stretching my imagination as kids do, and I kind of just never stopped doing that. So I loved absorbing media, absorbing stories, and imagining further stories for those characters. I mean, that's kind of how we get hooked is writing fan fiction, right? Imagining other tales for all the characters that we love. And from there, it's just kind of I was really into prose because I was an artist, so that's how I knew how to tell stories was through words. So I wrote fan fiction, various characters, and then I wrote my own stories, and eventually those short stories got longer into like novels and stuff. And I was always a reader of comics. I think I started reading in middle school, but it wasn't until like I really got out of college that I decided to combine my love of writing prose stories with my love of writing comics and trying to merge the two. And after a very steep learning curve, I got the groove for it. I think a little bit.
Nice, nice. That's awesome. Yeah, you tell that you're a storyteller. So, and you mentioned you wrote fan fiction. Do you want? Can you get into a little bit of like specifics of which what fan fiction did you write? Like any famous properties? So,
You
uh,
broke up a little
did I
bit.
freeze? Did,
You did.
oh
I
yeah.
think you're. I think you're back. So you're talking about fan
Okay,
fiction, right?
cool. Yeah, I'm just talking about which property did you write for, like the fan fiction?
Oh, I mean, I love everything, so I wanted to write fan fiction for everything. I wrote a Halo fan fiction for video games, Metal Gear Solid, Gears of War. Then comic books, I did Spider-Man fan fiction. I wrote a Man Thing fan fiction. Um, Mortal Kombat, I did another fan fiction for that, and it was all different sorts of stuff. Some of it was like a sequel, like a continuation of the story. Other things were like reimaginings, like I tried to do something, take the idea and do something completely different. X-Men, I did something for Freddy Krueger, the Saw franchise. So I was whatever I liked, I tried to imagine how I would continue this franchise, if it was kind of placed in my hands. And that allowed me to kind of like live out my dream. Like if I was able to write movies for these things, that would be awesome, but I can't being a kid. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
kind of put that dream into prose and fan fiction. And I put it all up online. It's still available. Anybody can read it. But it was looking back on it now, it's kind of like those drawings that you do in second grade that your parents kept. So that's what it feels like. But I still love it. I still kind of like it. And every once in a while, um, writers do what they call scraping off the serial numbers, where I wrote a Man Thing fan fiction and I wanted to share it with my audience. So I basically just took out all of the Man Thing particulars and I just made it a generic swamp monster kind of story. So I like doing
Yeah,
stuff like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So I might do this. I wrote a reimagining of the Phoenix Saga from X-Men. So it's kind of like
Oh,
my take on it. Like if I were to do Ultimate Phoenix Saga or whatever. So maybe at some point in time I could change all the names, and instead of making it a phoenix, I'll make it some other cosmic entity and just run with it. Just kind of try to
yeah.
publish like that.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I think what fan fiction really does is gives you a great sandbox of characters that already exist, so you don't have to write character backstories and things like that. You already, that's prior knowledge, and then all you have to do is actually play with the story. So it gives you that really good way to formulate your thoughts and learn about the structure and things like that.
Yeah,
um
it's a playground. You know, you're
yeah.
playing with you're basically playing with toys instead of grabbing my action figures and going like this and banging them together. I grew up and I decided to play with my action figures with words and have them fighting on the page instead of the banging the plastic together.
That's very well put. That's very, very well put. That's awesome. So, what's is you tell us a bit about your current project, the fourth Wallflower meta comedy that bends the law of comics.
I That's a weird project description. I didn't really because it. I mean, technically, if I were to put it into a box of a genre, it's a rom com. It's a romantic comedy. It's a love story. There's humor in it, but it really is so much more than that. It's my way of playing with the comics medium. The basic premise is a comic creator has a character come to life on the page, and this character is immediately self-aware. He knows he's a comic character. He knows he's in a story. He knows the story is starting from scratch. There's no setting, there's no
Hmm.
plot, there's no tone, there's nothing. It's just him in a void. And it's kind of like the character is building the story along with his creator, and he's talking directly to him. And it's just it was a lot of fun. It was just a lot of fun to play around with the various comic tropes and comic facets.
Yeah.
Like he plays around with sound effects and speech bubbles and captions, and we break down kind of the various building blocks of storytelling. We talk about tone through color and setting. So it's just a real love letter to storytelling, and it's in a very meta way.
Yeah, it's really fantastic because I think, like you said, it's love letter to storytelling and also to comics in general, right? Like it just feels like there's you're showing the whole process of creating this world through a character, and also commenting on like the tropes and all the cliches and things like that. um yeah, it's a really fun take that way. Yeah.
I try to. I mean, when you make a comic and you need to market it, you need to put it out to people. They always say figure out who the target audience is for this story, right? If when I put out my detective story, you got a noir mystery detective people. When I do horror stories, it's horror kind of scary monster people. With this, it's a rom com, but it's not just geared towards romantic comedy fans. It's really anybody who likes comics, who's into the sequential storytelling medium and that kind of format. And they'll find things to like about it because I play around with the style and the format so much that I think I hopefully they'll get a kick out of it.
I definitely think you have a winner on your hands.
I hope.
When
Well,
it ended, I was like, oh, oh,
it's a good
oh, sorry.
story.
Uh,
I'm sorry. Go on.
no, no, I was just saying, like, when it ended, I was like, that ended really quickly. I just wanted to keep going.
I get that complaint a lot about my stories. People want more of it. They want to know what happens at the end, and it ends on what I like to think is a good optimistic note because
Hmm.
there's a trap in this story in that Wally, the main character, he's self-aware. He knows he's in a comic story, and it's obviously scripted. His words, but he's talking as if it's not scripted, as if he's really living out this story. And at some point, the story has to end because otherwise, it just becomes too contrived. It becomes too forced. And I leave it on this open-ended kind of optimistic note where who knows what comes on the next page. It's that next page, it's not written yet. So
Yeah,
to me, to Wally, to the reader, it's all left open, and there's a huge possibility of things ending on in a happy ending. So I like that note that I ended on, that it's just it leaves it super open, but at the same time it's gives that, you know.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I agree. And I mean, I would love to have read like more issues of this, to be honest. So yeah, but it did remind me
It's one of those
of a
stories.
movie that I saw a while ago. Oh yeah, sorry, you were saying. Go for it.
Yeah, we're not synced. So when you say something, I get a little. um what was I gonna say? No, never mind, go on.
Sorry about that. No, it did remind me of this movie called Stranger Than Fiction, starring
Yes,
Will Ferrell.
I
Yeah,
know that movie.
I think yeah, the character in that of Will Ferrell is obviously character in Emma Thompson's novel, and he's basically he suddenly becomes self-aware of the fact that he's inside a story. But the whole hook is how is the good story going to end? Because Emma Thompson loves to, like her character in the movie, loves to kill the characters of her books at the end with like they
The
always make
writer,
tragic ending.
she doesn't literally murder them, but
Yeah,
the
yeah,
way
yeah,
she can,
exactly. The writer.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a very, yeah, it's an interesting story. I like experimenting, taking ideas and trying to see how they work out. And the fourth wallflower is cool because I had this initial idea of a self-aware comic character, but that's just an idea, it's not a plot, it's not really a story. So it was an interesting exercise to have the story unfold as I'm writing it, and creating a character that it's unfolding with, at the same time, parallel to each other. So it was a bizarre experience compared to other scripts that I've written.
yeah. I think for the audience, the biggest thing they'll find out of it is I think that the whole journey of self discovery that you go on with the character is such a how would I put it? Like it's a very satisfying thing as a reader. So yeah,
Yeah, Wally is in this weird predicament in that the main theme of the story is free will versus predestiny, right? Whether or not we are able to control our own lives, or whether or not everything is fate and just going to happen the way it is. And for Wally, that's true. You know, his story is already written. Once you start reading the first page, the last page is written. It's just you haven't gotten there yet. But in our own lives, that might not be true. So the weird dichotomy between Wally, the character that we know definitively he has no free will, and us, the creator that he's talking to, where we're kind of battling with that free will versus fate. It makes for a very interesting dialogue. So I that's one of the parts of the story that
yeah.
I love.
No, absolutely. It does also make for really fascinating reading because you're always on your seat's edge trying to think what's going to happen next, in the story. So yeah, it works both ways as a writer and and a reader.
Yeah, I love this story. I'm super into it. But we're writers, we're storytellers, we're super into comics. I think people that aren't really entrenched in the medium and the process of storytelling, I'm it might go over their heads a little bit. My wife read it and she was like, "Oh, that's cute," and but she didn't really get into like the weeds of what writing is like. So it hits differently for her. It's kind of it's a comic book for comic book people. And my wife would sometimes read comics and she gets kicks out of the story, but she doesn't truly have that obsession over the medium that some of us do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I get that. That's like you said, it's a very accessible story for a very wide variety of audiences. So yeah, that's great. Awesome. Do you have like how far along have you planned the arc and the story?
This
Have you
story,
planned it?
this story, I a lot of my stories are just one shots, one and done. I have an idea, I flesh it out, and I want to pay tribute to this one tale. I don't want to make it some overarching thing, and that doesn't mean that Wally won't come back. I think out of all the characters I've written, he's stayed with me the most. Pretty much because he has his own voice.
Hmm.
He's screaming at me during the entire writing process, so it's very hard to shake him. I'm having a lot of fun planning this Kickstarter because I can utilize him as a fourth wall breaking character. He shows up in all sorts of different promo images and pinups and stuff, speaking his mind. So he's very hard to get rid of. So eventually, at some point, maybe I'll do a follow up. It's just you can't force things like this. Meta stories
Hmm.
can go sideways very easily. So if Wally's journey continues in a different kind of story, it has to come naturally. It has to just come to me. I can't try to sit down and pound out a sequel to this. It's not. It's going to come across as artificial, and that's the last thing you want in a fourth wall breaking book.
Yeah, yeah. That's I agree to that 100%. I think that like kudos to who like Deadpool writers to keep it fresh over the years, even with a lot of like with so much fourth wall breaking, both in comics and and the
I think
movies.
I think
Yeah.
Deadpool has a little bit of an advantage over Wally in that he's part of a larger universe. He's got so many other characters and events that he can insert himself in that help push the plot of his stories forward. Wally doesn't have that. He has himself, and he knows that the entire world is fake. It's an artificial construction of the creator's mind. So it's any story that he's involved in, he's the center focus. It's not like he's placed in the backdrop of some other tale. So it's going to be tricky trying to make a sequel to with him.
That's true. And I think that's what makes it so fantastic and also hard to write for. So yeah,
But
yeah,
I never say never to
amazing.
anything. I had a book called The Macabre Motel, which was a spooky horror kind of sci-fi ish Twilight Zone tale, and everybody loved it. And at the end of it, it kind of ends on the same like note where everyone's like, "I need to know what happens next." And I said, "Too bad, it's a one shot." And they said, "Well, what's the next one?" And I said, "I don't have one planned." But that was 4 years ago, and now I'm going to be kickstarting a follow up this year. So I never say never to anything. When inspiration strikes, you kind of just have to run with it. So
Yeah,
it's all a matter of if that spark ignites.
that's fantastic, and I think that's a great way to do things as well because then what I really don't like about like a lot of books and movies and TV shows these days is when they plan things they already like at the end of one story arc they already start planning for the next one, and which sometimes leads me to
Hmm.
like okay, let's have one ending which is like nicely tied in a nice little bow and say we're done with this. When we come to the next
Hmm.
season or whatever, we should start fresh and like at a point where the lives of the characters have moved to a certain point. But that does mean the previous story has been completely concluded and has no bearing on the next one. Maybe little, but not that much. So yeah.
It's tricky. I think it all depends on what your intentions are. You know, something like the MCU is infamous for that. They always have the lead-ins and the extra credit scenes and the cameos, but they're building a universe. They're building towards something. And when you're building towards something, you need to lay those seeds so it all makes sense in the end. But I'm with you. I mean, so many shows get milked with seasons way beyond what they should do. Kudos to some of the shows that go out on top, like Breaking Bad. Like everyone's like, why
Yeah.
is it ending? The show had a steady increase in popularity. The first season, nobody knew about it, and it slowly got better and better and better and better. And by the last season, I think it was the fifth season, it was like the talk of the town. Nobody could get enough of it, and they're like, "We're done."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they knew exactly what they were doing with that, and so I appreciate that they went out on top. A lot of
Yeah.
shows don't do that.
That's very, very true. I think for the writers it's a hard job to do, but I think when in their mind, when characters reach a certain point which seems like a natural ending, or not really ending to the story, but a conclusion to the arc that started it, like if it feels organic, I think that's when you should end. I mean, yeah, you can also argue Sopranos ended on a cliffhanger, right? The most infamous cliffhanger ever. But I mean, it was still a good conclusion to that character's story, right? Like Tony Soprano was happy in the end, and that's what makes it relevant.
I think a lot of these big shows and movies, the problem isn't, maybe a little bit the writers, but I think the big problem comes with the people that control the purse strings. When they have a hit on their hands, they want to milk it dry. They want to keep running it for as long as possible. And the main thing that they have is they know what's going to succeed based on what came before it, right? That's the truest indicator. So if they're looking at seasons and they say, "Look, we're having steady growth from season to season," they can't possibly imagine in their executive business like minds that you can't have eternal growth in a story. Eventually, there's going to be a downtick. It just, you can't keep going up forever, and they don't want to
Yeah,
admit that, and that's how we get shows that are like 8, 9 seasons long.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, when somebody's controlling the story that has a business mindset rather than a creative one, you can run out of steam. It just happens.
yeah, yeah. That's true. Like that's why I love shows. Like I don't know if you have seen. There's a show called Midnight Mass on Netflix.
I've heard of it. But I haven't seen it because there's a million great shows and you just can't watch everything.
That's very true. That's very true. But I think it's one of the most beautiful shows I've seen in the last few years. In it talks a lot about like groupthink and like being in uh, with the whole political climate being around like those kind of things. It does talk a lot about like when people rally behind a cause, what happens, and things like that. uh, but it is so beautifully done, and the ending is so satisfying. And they won't come up with the next season, we know that. It's the end. That's where the story ends. That's where, like, we had closure, and that's good.
I I'm liking a lot of shows that take an anthology approach to their seasons. We're seeing that a lot with stuff like Fargo was like that. I watched a show on Netflix. I think it was a Canadian show. It's called Slasher, and every season of Slasher was basically about a slasher, about a serial killer, and then each season started a brand new story. So they're all contained, beginning, middle, and ends. And I'm digging that a lot with shows where they're thematically linked, but they're not linked in character and plot. And sometimes they try to link them in character and plot. We see a little bit of that with like American Horror Story. Every season of American Horror Story is completely separate, but they try to keep it all in the same timeline, the same universe. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, I think it's becoming more popular, and a lot of creators see the value in those self-contained seasons, if not self-contained episodes. A lot of anthology shows now are just like Black Mirror-esque, where we just have
yeah,
single episode. Those are great too, because they know what they're doing. They don't want to drag things out. They have a purpose to
yeah,
them, and so I
yeah,
I truly appreciate when they try to do that.
yeah. Haunting of Hill House is pretty similar, like you said.
Yes,
It's an anthology series. Yeah,
what was they had the Haunting of Hill House, and then they had the Haunting of Bly Manor, right? Like that was the follow up, I
yeah,
believe.
yeah, yeah. but they're
So
completely
yeah.
different stories. So yeah,
You know what with that, they were completely different stories, but they were also very different in tone too. The first one was, it was a lot of horror, and the second season had a little bit of horror, but it was more like paranormal romance. You know, it had more of that romantic drama aspect to it.
yeah,
So, even though, like, yeah, they're both about houses and hauntings, the storytellers said, "Look, we're going to try something new. We're going to try something different." And I liked the first season better. I didn't really like the changes they made in the second season. I thought it was a little bit slow. But as a writer, I appreciate that chance. You know, I appreciate the
yeah,
experimentation they did. They saw an idea and they executed it, and they did it to the best of their abilities. So, and everybody's going to react to it differently. So I like, and Netflix does that. They give their creators and their writers kind of freedom to kind of do what they want, and I dig that.
yeah. That's a huge advantage we have with indie comics as well. There's no one really pulling the strings to actually influence us in a certain direction, right? Like we are actually free to do whatever we want with our stories. Um,
That's true. I think at one point we get the only thing that's our boss is the almighty dollar. You know, we can't. These things are expensive. We can't make them without appealing to some audience, to some customer base, to fund these things. So it's a give and take between doing what you want to do and doing what makes money. you know
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so sometimes I fall into the former because I'm stubborn, and I think that anything that I make is going to make a buttload of money. And I the reptilian side of my brain wants to think that, and the mammal side of my brain is just like, no, you idiots! Not everything is going to make money. What are you talking about? You made a weird comic about a comic character talking to his creator. So it's not going to make a lot of money. It's just not going to happen. But I was very satisfied making this book, which scratches an itch that money really I can't reach.
That's amazing. No, that's fantastic. Uh, yeah, I like. Yeah, that's amazing. So this I usually do with this segment with every creator on the show, and I like to put people on the spot a little bit.
Go for it.
Um, yeah. So the question is, what what are the top five pop culture things that you like? Could be a movie, could be TV
That's
shows,
a
could
very
be.
open-ended question.
It's-
You're talking you're talking what period of life? Like right now, when I was 12, when I was 25?
that's up to you to choose, I
All
guess.
right, all right.
Yeah.
Because you know what? There was a time when I was in high school, I was the biggest diehard Halo fanboy. I loved Halo, like completely the franchise. And now I like, if a new Halo game comes out, I'm not interested. They lost me somewhere along the lines that I just can't do it anymore. But something that has kept my interest from the very first game has been the Assassin's Creed franchise. A
Hmm.
lot of people hate on them. They say they're repetitive and they're boring. And you know what? That may be true. But I love the story. I love stealth games. So I'm there at day one for every single installment. I really dig it. So that's number one. I'll use Assassin's Creed as my first one. Number two, you know what? I'll go with Marvel. The Marvel movies.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
people. Where's mommy? I don't know. Go look. She's in the house somewhere. Kids. So, I you know what, I like the Marvel movies. Not everyone I like, but I appreciate the universe that they're doing. When I was a kid, I couldn't possibly imagine. We had the Fantastic Four, X Men, Spider Man, Hulk. We had all these isolated franchises, and I could never imagine them. Or I wanted them to be in the same universe, and now it's finally happening. And what am I going to do? Complain about it? No, it's great. You know, this is the type of stuff I wanted as a kid. So I
Yeah.
really did, even though not everything hits, I love the experimentation. I love the characters. I love the universe. So
Yeah.
yeah, second one, Marvel. What else am I really digging? I'm getting into Star Trek in my elder
Nice.
years. I wasn't a Star
Yeah.
Trek guy when I was younger. I'm playing catch up on all the shows. I'm on like season 4 of Deep Space Nine, and
Nice.
I appreciate the cerebral nature of the storytelling. I love Star Wars, but Star Wars doesn't really get into those sci-fi premises where they're experimenting and trying to explore different ideas the same way that Star Trek does.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'll say Star Trek is number three. What else am I really digging? I'm a huge Boys fan. The new season just dropped
Nice.
today, the first three episodes.
Yeah.
So I would say when that show airs, that's the show I'm looking forward to every week. You know, it
Hmm.
just scratches that itch for me. It has a lot of shock value, but I feel like the characterization and the plot and the pacing are always they come before the shock value. You know, it's not the shock value is pushing the plot and characters forward. It's the other way around. So
Yeah.
that would be number four. And number five, I'll go with my favorite novel, which is Dune. I love Dune. I just saw part two. It dropped on Max a couple weeks ago, and
Ah, nice.
I love that story. So to see it unfold with all the special effects on the screen, you got great, phenomenal actors, phenomenal art design and production, and it was cool. I think he successfully adapted a very hard novel to adapt.
Oh
So
yeah.
five
I
done.
well done actually. No, I think that's great. You talked about Dune. I feel like Denis Villeneuve has done such a fantastic job with both the Dune movies. Like he's just hit the nail on its head. Yeah, I mean there are flaws and stuff, and you can go on
Nothing's
an endless
perfect.
debate about it. Yeah, that's
No.
fine, but it still gets the essence of the story right and captures it in such a beautiful, imaginative way that yeah, it just gets a life of its own. I think.
I think it's easy for people to Monday morning quarterback these things. You know, they're so expensive. There's such massive operations to film. They take so long. It has such an ensemble cast. Can you imagine the egos on that set with all of those actors? My God! So the fact that he
Yeah,
pulls it off is just a miracle in and of itself. And so yeah, we can I can nitpick little things that I didn't like, but it was an enjoyable experience. I got to see it, and I enjoyed it.
yeah, yeah. That's fantastic. I do want to watch the new Mad Max movie. That's one I've been looking forward to for a very long time since I watched the last Mad Max Fury Road. Yes, I've been looking forward to the Furiosa
I
movie.
wouldn't say I'm
But
looking
yeah,
forward to it,
that's
but I it's definitely once it hits streaming, it's definitely gonna catch my interest. So it's one of those
yeah, yeah.
I'm not gonna pass up.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that fascinates me the most about Mad Max is I think despite like how the original movies were so scrappy and they were literally made out of scrap like most of the movies because they had to get imaginative. They didn't have a budget. They had like a budget of like 6,000 Australian dollars or something, and they just put together everything in that tiny
I love that. I
shoes.
love that about
Yeah,
Yeah, I love that shoestring budget filmmaking mindset. Uh, my one of my favorite movies is Saw, and
yeah,
they got a bigger studio budget eventually when they started filming, but their initial premise of having two people in a room chained up was because they had no money. So they're like, well, what if we have one room? Like that's the whole movie. Well, why are they one room? Because they can't leave. They're chained. Why are they chained? So they use their budgetary restrictions to create a story. And I think that's just such a cool idea and concept. And that backstory makes me love the film
yeah,
even more.
yeah. A lot of the best stories are actually like built on like because there's a budget constraint. People have to work around these fantastic they have to write these things into the story, like even like Reservoir Dogs, right? They had literally no budget. Like made on like $15,000 or something. It was pretty low budget. Yeah,
I just saw something. I saw a clip online. It was a comedian. It was like they're doing a podcast roundtable kind of chat, and he theorized that in the next decade or so, we're going to get some really great movies because of this reason. Because look, Mad Max, the new Furiosa movie, it's a big budget blockbuster, spent all this money making it, and it's tough to make money back in this day and age of
Yeah.
streaming. People aren't going to the movies, and so studios are going to curtail those budgets a lot. You know, they're going to be trying to make movies for $20 million, which it's a lot of money, but when you're trying to make a blockbuster, it's really not. So we're going to see a
Yeah.
lot of creators try to get inventive with their filmmaking, get inventive with their stories and their characters in order to try to hook people different ways. And we might see like the birth of new kinds of franchises with this new generation where the blockbuster you can't just rely on like Will Smith and Bad Boys anymore to bring people to the box office because it's just a different day and age. The movie stars aren't the same. We have streaming. There's so many other factors that's different than when we were kids.
Very true. Very true. That's what A24 and Blumhouse do, right? Like they give like voice to these fantastic writers and directors, and they give them a very small budget to work with, but they want people to spend on the right things, right? Like,
Yeah.
for example, I was watching this interview with Edward Eggers, who's the director for The Witch, and a bunch of other, that
He
movie.
did he did Lighthouse, right? He's got
Yes,
it.
Lighthouse,
I
and
think he has a Nosferatu movie coming out, doesn't he? Like a remake of Nosferatu.
yeah.
So it
So
should be interesting to see.
he said the biggest budget on The Witch was actually the lenses that he used to capture the mood of the lighting and everything. And the other one was the person who translated all the dialogue in the period accurate era. So like those were the two biggest expenses for him in the movie. But
More
that
than
that
more
kind
than
of
the
gave them.
actors.
Yeah,
It's great.
exactly.
It's weird that the dialect coach was greater than the actors themselves.
But yeah, I think that's what gave that movie that edge, like that like it just gave it an extra dimension of like made it so much more authentic to watch.
I think you mentioned Bloomhouse. Bloomhouse is a great example. They've made a career off of just low budget horror movies. They found a way to people love horror, and you don't need a enormous amount of special effects. You don't need all the big name actors for horror. I think horror fans have been born out of that grungy low budget era. I love the show, the movies that made us on Netflix.
Yeah.
And was this it might have been like a Halloween special because they did a whole bunch of horror movies and they did one for Friday the 13th, and they were like right from the start, we are making a Halloween knockoff. Like that's our goal. Like, and they no qualms about it. We want to make our own slasher movie, and it's so low budget. They're talking about special effects and pumping blood stuff, and and characters just like they have the serial killer, but the woman who played Mrs. Voorhees was like there for like 20 minutes of filming. She was drunk the whole time. It was like it's very cool to see the behind the scenes of this cult classic legendary film that was just like they were flying by the seat of their pants when they were making it. So that's how magic happens. No, you can't. It's hard to catch lightning in a bottle like that.
That's very, very true. I totally agree on that. But yeah, that's how some of the best work gets done. Like you start with the seed of an idea. Let's just rip off this X franchise. But then it also depends on the creators, right? The people working, the crew behind that whole movie was so fantastic. They actually ended up creating something very original and fun altogether. So yeah.
By accident. Jason's not even in the first movie. Like the most iconic character that's part of the franchise wasn't even in the original.
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
So
exactly.
it's just so cool how things mold and evolve over time, and what sticks and what doesn't. Does the bag over Jason's head stick? No, that doesn't work. But the next movie puts on the mask, and all of a sudden, that's what everybody knows. So it's yeah,
Yeah,
you
I
can't make
was
this
watching
stuff up.
this. Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with Red Letter Media's work, but I was watching this one of their videos on Child's Play, and they were talking about this whole franchise, how the whole franchise has actually managed to keep itself fresh, despite uh,
It's a
like
weird
just
franchise. It's a very weird franchise.
yeah, exactly. They have a TV show or something, right? Like I think
They
they
have a TV show. I watched it, and you know, it's the TV show's weird because in the beginning, it seems like it's its own thing. Like it's just it's part of the universe, but it's started off separate. So it was like you don't need to know anything about the Child's Play franchise. You could just need to know Chucky's a doll, killer doll, and now he's just doing his killer doll thing. And then halfway through the first season, I think
yeah.
they somehow tie it completely into the lore of the franchise, where all the characters come back. And I'm like, I'm completely lost. What's going on? So it was very weird how they did that, but yeah, people that love Child's Play. I was super into Child's Play as a kid. It got so bizarre the way they kept it going. And that another one like that was the Full Moon franchise Puppet Master. You familiar with Puppet
Hmm.
Master?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they made so many sequels, and somehow they just kept like getting the story getting more and more ridiculous. So it's by the end it got so B movie, so cheesy. But it's like that's what horror fans love. They love cheese. Especially
Yeah.
so I grew up in the blockbuster era of horror, which was like the cheesiest of the cheese, you know? We didn't have A24 back then. So seeing stuff like that, get a little bit of nostalgia for those types of movies.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it definitely has a good place in both pop culture and it's just that on some nights you just like to sit with your popcorn and like to watch, a good slasher movie. So,
I watched
uh,
on a plane ride recently. I saw Freaky. Are you familiar with this movie with Vince Vaughn?
it's like Freaky Friday with
Yeah,
a
it's
twist
Freaky
of
Friday, but with
yes.
a girl swaps bodies with a serial killer. And it's like it's a comedy horror, you know. It's definitely a slasher. There's gore, there's murder, but Vince Vaughn
Yeah,
swaps bodies with a teenage girl, so Vince Vaughn's acting like a teenage girl. So you have these moments of complete hilarity that are so funny, and then the next scene a guy is getting brutally murdered. So it's like those that's the type of stuff that
yeah,
horror fans are that dig, and I was into it. It's another one of those high concept, low budget movies that just work in the horror genre.
yeah. I agree. I think the one that worked for me really well was Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day 2.
That's I think the same
Um,
director. I think this the same director writer
oh
did
yeah, yeah,
did
yeah.
both those. So both of those two I really liked. I watched them back to back when I was sick on demand. So that's how I remember them. But but yeah, that was a movie I watched. I'm like, this is not going to win an Academy Award, and I love it. You know?
Yeah. But it will give you a good time, and you'll have a blast watching them.
You
Those
know what's great
movies,
about horror
and
movies too? They're short. You know, you
yeah,
don't have. It's not like
yeah,
a Marvel movie or a Martin Scorsese movie where you got to dedicate 2.5, 3 hours to watching it. Kind of like I got 85 minutes to kill. Let's pop this sucker on. You know, so that's why they're fun.
yeah. Exactly, exactly. That's awesome, Frank. I think we're coming close to time, but before we go, I would love for you to give a quick pitch, give a good spiel of the comic, The Fourth Wallflower. Why should people follow it? I've read it. Before you start, I think I'll just say it's a beautiful book. It's a fantastic book. It's something different for the palette, and uh, yeah, read it.
I think I'm gonna
Sure, the
build
floor is
off of what
yours.
you say by saying it's different. I'm gonna say it's different, right? That's gonna be my main thing. Um, it doesn't matter if you like horror, if you like crime, if you like comedy, if you or fantasy. If you're into comics and you're gonna read something completely different with the fourth wallflower, it's hard for me to compare it to something else that's it's hard. There's nothing really comparable to it out there. I mean, we have self aware characters like Deadpool and Gwenpool, but this takes it to a whole nother level. And so, if you just want to appreciate you might hate it at the end, but if you want to appreciate the experimentation, trying to do something unique, trying to do something different, I hope you'll give it a shot.
I don't think anyone would hate this book. It has so much heart. It has so much heart to it. It's so hard
You
to
know what?
hate something like this.
I've stopped predicting people's opinions long ago. Who knows what's somebody's going to get angry at something. It's just there's enough people in the world that somebody is gonna find something to hate about this.
Well, I'm a big softie, and I just loved it. It was heartwarming to me. Like it was just lovely.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Thank you.
Uh, thanks for coming on the show, Frank. I truly appreciate it. And all the best for your campaign, and all the other books that you write as well.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome.